The Caribbean dawn of May 15th, 1718, and I want you to really picture this, found Captain Jack Thornley. They called him Mad Jack, watching something that would have driven any reasonable commander absolutely insane. His best marksman, Portuguese Pedro, a man who could supposedly shoot the eye out of a playing card at 60 paces on solid ground, was missing his 20th shot in a row. 20 shots. Think about that for a second. The Spanish merchant vessel Santa Rosa rolled just 40 yards away. 40 yards. That's the length of a school bus parked end to end maybe 3 times. Her officers stood exposed on the quarterdeck, practically posing for portraits, and yet Pedro's musket balls kept splashing uselessly into the churning sea between the ships. This was the curse every pirate knew but rarely spoke aloud, the dirty secret of Caribbean warfare on land. With both feet planted on something that wasn't trying to throw you off balance, a skilled marksman could perform miracles. But put that same man on a pitching deck with 6-foot swells rolling under him, even 30 yards became impossible. And here's the thing about these smooth-bore muskets. The technology that defined naval combat in this era, they took 40 seconds to load. 40 seconds. Pour the powder down the barrel, ram the wadding, drop the ball, prime the pan, cock the hammer, aim if you're optimistic, and fire. 40 seconds per shot to miss a target you could practically throw a rock at. When the sea grew restless, and the sea was always restless, these weapons became expensive clubs. Expensive being the operative word here. Young Tom Weatherby, just 12 years old, working as a powder monkey aboard Thornley's brigantine Serpent's Dream, would later record in his journal how that morning changed everything. The kid was hauling gunpowder up from the magazine, watching the whole disaster unfold, and he understood what the Spanish officers had figured out. Knew they were safe from musket fire in these rolling swells. So they stood there, brazenly in the open, directing their cannon crews with complete impunity. They weren't being brave, they were being smart. Thornley's crew numbered 87 men, and this is important because it tells you something about the pirate world in 1718. These weren't Hollywood pirates. They were former slaves from Barbados who'd tasted freedom and refused to go back. Discharged soldiers from Queen Anne's War who'd learned that the Crown paid poorly and treated them worse. Desperate men from a dozen nations who'd run out of options in the legitimate world. They watched their captain's face darken with each missed shot, and they knew what it meant. The economics were brutal, friends. Each musket ball cost as much as a day's ration of rum. The gunpowder, imported from Jamaica, fetched prices that made grown men weep. And here's the kicker. Thornley had 300 muskets in the ship's armory. 300. And they'd proven genuinely useful exactly twice, both times in calm harbours where the water was flat as glass. Now, Thornley himself, and you've got to understand this man, to understand why what comes next matters, he embodied all the contradictions of his age. Educated by Jesuits in Porto until age 14, which meant he could read Latin and do complex mathematics. Then captured by Barbary corsairs, which sounds like a nightmare but turned out to be an education of a different kind. The Ottomans taught him their mathematics, their engineering principles, things that European schools weren't teaching. He'd served as a Royal Navy quartermaster, learned the official way of doing things, before choosing what they called the sweet trade piracy. His ledgers were discovered centuries later in a Tortuga cave, and they're fascinating because they show us exactly how much this problem was costing them. He calculated that pirates captured only 1 in 5 ships they could have taken if musket fire had been reliable. 1 in 5. Think about the lost revenue. Spanish treasure fleets succeeded 70% of the time simply because return fire in rough seas was impossible. The Brotherhood of the Coast, this loose confederation of pirates that controlled chunks of the Caribbean, was bleeding gold into the sea with every missed shot. The battle that morning ended as most did, grappling hooks flying across the gap, boarding axes biting into the Spanish railings. Cutlass work up close where skill and desperation mattered more than technology. 17 men died, 30 were wounded, and as Thornley watched the Spanish captain's body slip beneath the blood-slicked waves, killed finally by a pistol at 3 paces rather than a musket at proper range, he made a decision that would change everything. In the captured Spanish navigator's cabin, while his men were looting the cargo hold, he found something. An Ottoman compass mounted in a spinning brass cradle, designed to remain steady despite the ship's movement. It defied the ocean's chaos through pure mechanical ingenuity, and Thornley stood there, holding this device, and you can imagine the wheels turning in his head. If a compass could stay steady while the ship rolled, if brass and springs and clever engineering could defeat the sea's motion. That night, while his crew celebrated below decks with captured Madeira wine, singing songs and dividing shares, Thornley sat alone in his cabin, sketching by candlelight, drawing spinning wheels within wheels, imagining a musket that could dance with the waves yet strike true, a weapon that could make 40 yards feel like 10, a device that could turn every rolling deck into solid ground. He had no idea if it was possible, no idea what it would cost, no idea that 3 years later he'd be assembling mines from 4 continents in a hidden workshop, attempting something that wouldn't appear in naval arsenals for another century. No idea that his innovation would briefly change the balance of power in the Caribbean before destroying everything he held dear. But on that night of May 15th, 1718, with the screams of wounded men drifting up from the surgeon's table and the smell of blood thick in his cabin, Jack Thornley drew his first design for a gyroscopic musket mount and whispered a promise to himself. No more missing at 40 yards. By September 1719, the hidden workshop on Dead Man's Cay had become something that would have absolutely astounded the Royal Society back in London. And when I say hidden, I mean hidden. This place was tucked behind a maze of barrier reefs that had claimed 40 ships over the years. Spanish patrols couldn't find it. British Navy couldn't find it, which was exactly the point. Thornley had invested everything into this mad endeavour. His share from 9 captured prizes, and we're talking serious money here, enough to retire comfortably in any port city from Boston to Buenos Aires. Loans from the pirate lords of Nassau, men who didn't loan money lightly and collected debts with interest measured in blood, even his mother's golden crucifix, a family heirloom from Porto. Everything went into this workshop. But here's what makes this story remarkable. The collection of minds that Thornley assembled in this hidden jungle clearing. You couldn't have put together a more diverse group of geniuses if you'd tried. Think about the obstacles in 1719. No internet, no international scientific journals, no university exchange programs. And yet somehow, on this tiny Caribbean island, Thornley gathered expertise from 4 continents. Liu Wei was a Mandarin-speaking engineer who'd fled the Qing dynasty with knowledge of ancient Chinese spinning tops and celestial spheres. The Chinese had been playing with gyroscopic principles for centuries, though they'd never thought to apply them to weapons. Francisco de Torres, a Spanish clockmaker kidnapped from Havana, and yes, kidnapped. Let's not romanticize this, who could craft springs finer than human hair. The precision required for what Thornley wanted demanded clockmaker skills. Samuel Blackwood, a rogue British artillery officer who understood the mathematics of trajectory, the physics of how a musket ball travels through air, and Mama Aduni, a Yoruba metal worker whose understanding of brass casting surpassed European techniques. The workshop itself sprawled across 2 acres of cleared jungle, hidden under palm frond roofs that looked like nothing from the sea. 12 forges burned day and night. Day and night, the sound of hammers on anvils mixed with heated arguments in 7 languages. Can you imagine the chaos? Chinese arguing with Spanish about spring tension while Portuguese debated with Yoruba about brass composition. Children of pirates, because yes, there were families here learned geometry by playing with wooden prototypes. Kids who'd never seen the inside of a schoolroom doing mathematics because it was fun. The cultural mixing was unprecedented for the age. Muslim prayers at dawn, followed by Catholic Mass at noon. African drumming accompanying Chinese meditation. Pirates who'd never held a book, learning to read technical drawings because they needed to understand what they were building. And here's the thing that Thornley enforced with deadly seriousness. He had one rule that could get you killed if you broke it. Knowledge belonged to all who worked here, regardless of birth or station. It didn't matter if you were born a slave or a nobleman. If you had expertise, you shared it. If you needed to learn, you were taught. This was revolutionary. Not just the technology they were developing, but the social structure they'd created to develop it. The failures came fast and brutal. The first prototype seemed promising on paper, a simple spinning disc mechanism. They loaded it, wound it up, fired it, and the thing shattered, just exploded. Sent brass shrapnel through Miguel's shoulder. He survived, but barely. The second prototype attempted to use water-filled chambers for stability, because water stays level, right? Except the water leaked into the powder chamber and the whole thing misfired, burning Thomas the Welshman's hands so badly they curled into permanent claws. He couldn't work metal anymore, couldn't hold a cutlass. 17 men were injured before they got their first successful design. 17 men. Stop and think about that. In a modern research facility, one serious injury would shut down the entire program. Safety investigations, lawsuits, insurance claims. These men kept going because they believed in what they were building, or because they'd invested everything and had no choice, probably both. The breakthrough came in the most unlikely way. Liu Wei, drunk on Kill Devil rum, which is basically Caribbean moonshine that could strip paint compared. The problem to keeping a spinning top upright on a moving cart. He was gesturing wildly, probably barely coherent, but Blackwood understood what he was getting at. A spinning object resists changes to its orientation. Basic physics. But applying that principle to a musket mount required solving an engineering problem that wouldn't officially be solved until the 1800s. The solution they developed required continuous power. Springs wound like clock mechanisms that would keep a brass gyroscope spinning for exactly 90 seconds. Not 2 minutes, not a minute. 90 seconds was the sweet spot where spring tension, metal fatigue, and practical combat needs intersected. Long enough for 3 aimed shots. After that, you had to wind it again, which took about 15 seconds. So the shooter could get off 3 shots, wind, 3 more shots, wind, and keep cycling as long as the springs held. By Christmas 1720, and we're talking over a year of constant work, constant failures, constant injuries, they had 12 working prototypes. 12. The mechanism was elegantly simple once you understood it, but getting to that understanding had cost a fortune, and nearly 24 serious injuries. A musket mounted in a double gimbal frame, counterweighted and connected to a spinning brass wheel powered by clock springs. The shooter would wind the mechanism, wait 3 seconds for the gyroscope to reach full speed. You could hear it humming, then have 90 precious seconds of stability, regardless of what the ship was doing underneath them. The first successful test happened during a Force 5 gale, wind howling, rain coming down sideways, waves crashing over the test ship's deck. Portuguese Pedro, remember him from the beginning? The man who missed 20 shots. He wound the mechanism, waited for the hum, aimed, and put 3 musket balls through a floating barrel at 80 yards. 80 yards in a Force 5 gale. Grown men wept at the sight. Some fell to their knees. They'd done it. They'd actually done it. But success brought danger. And this is where the story gets complicated. Spanish spies in Nassau started offering 1,000 peso rewards for information about Thornley's workshop. 1,000 pesos could set a man up for life. The British Admiralty, hearing rumours, dispatched agents disguised as merchants to the Caribbean. 2 attempts were made to burn the workshop. Fires started mysteriously in the night. Thornley's own crew grew divided. Some saw the innovation as salvation, the edge that would finally make pirates equal to naval powers. Others saw it as a violation of the pirate way, too much reliance on technology rather than skill and courage. The pirate lords of Nassau demanded demonstrations. They wanted shares. They wanted guarantees that this wasn't some elaborate scheme to take their money. The cost of materials alone threatened to bankrupt the entire enterprise. Brass didn't grow on trees. Quality springs required specialized steel. The precision tools wore out and needed replacement. Every prototype cost what a small merchant ship would earn in a year, yet Thornley pressed on. And I think this is what defines him. He was driven by a vision of a Caribbean where pirates could stand as equals to naval powers. where accuracy at sea would level the playing field between converted merchant vessels and purpose-built warships, where 87 desperate men on a brigantine could face down 400 soldiers on a galleon and win through superior technology rather than just superior courage. By spring 1721, 24 gyroscopic mounts were ready, 24 devices that could change naval warfare forever. They'd been tested in calm seas and storms. They'd been refined and improved through countless iterations. The springs were reliable, the brass was pure, the gimbals moved smoothly. It was time to see if they actually worked in combat. August 3rd, 1721, the Battle of Devil's Teeth Reef. This is the moment where theory meets reality, where all that engineering and all those injuries and all that money either pays off or becomes the most expensive failure in pirate history. Thornley's single brigantine, now mounting 12 gyroscopic musket stations, faced 3 Spanish treasure galleons. 3. The San Felipe, Nuestra Señora, and Santo Cristo, carrying 900,000 pieces of 8 from the Potosí silver mines. To put that in perspective, 900,000 pieces of 8 could buy a small European country, or fund a war, or make every man on Thornley's crew richer than most nobles. The Spanish commander, Admiral Don Carlos Mendoza, had 400 men and 90 cannons to Thornley's 80 pirates and 16 guns. By conventional calculation, and I cannot stress this enough, this was suicide. You don't take on 3 treasure galleons with a single brigantine. That's not bravery, that's stupidity. Except Thornley had something Mendoza had never seen before. The engagement began at dawn with the Spanish controlling the weather gauge. For those who don't know naval terminology, controlling the weather gauge means you're upwind, which gives you enormous tactical advantages in the age of sail. You can choose when to engage. You can break off if things go badly. You dictate the terms of battle. These massive Spanish galleons were bearing down on Thornley's smaller vessel with all the confidence of apex predators. But as the range closed to 200 yards, and this is where everything changes, Thornley's marksmen began their deadly dance. 200 yards. That's impossibly far for musket work in this era. Laughably far. You don't even bother shooting at 200 yards because you're just wasting powder and ball. Except Thornley's men weren't wasting anything. Tom Weatherby, now 15 years old and trained as what they called a steady eye, that's what they tell eye, called the marksman using the gyroscopic mounts, would later describe the moment in his journal, and his words are haunting. The ship rolled fierce, 15 degrees to port, 20 to starboard. Yet my musket remained true as if held by God's own hand. I saw the Spanish captain's plume hat, took breath, squeezed, and watched him fall like heaven itself had pointed my shot. Within 10 minutes, 17 Spanish officers lay dead or dying. 10 minutes, picked off with impossible accuracy from a ship dancing in 6-foot swells. Think about what that does to a military organization. Officers aren't just leaders, they're the ones who know what to do in combat. They're the experience, they're the training. And suddenly, from distances that shouldn't be possible, they're dropping like someone's playing a video game with an aimbot. The psychological impact was devastating. Spanish gun crews, seeing their officers fall to what seemed like supernatural marksmanship, began abandoning their posts. They weren't cowards, they were rational. If your officers are being killed by invisible devils who can shoot through waves and distance, maybe you don't want to stand next to the cannon anymore. Maybe you want to be below decks where it's safe. Mendoza himself, taking shelter behind the mizzenmast, couldn't understand what was happening. His journal was recovered from Spanish archives centuries later, and you can hear the confusion and terror in his words. The devils shot as if their vessel was anchored to the seabed itself, while we rolled and pitched like cork in a tempest. He thought they'd somehow anchored their ship. That was the only explanation his mind could accept for accuracy that shouldn't exist for another 100 years. But here's where Thornley's genius really shows. The tactical innovation went beyond mere accuracy. He'd developed an entirely new fighting doctrine built around these gyroscopic mounts. Target prioritization, focusing on officers and helmsmen cut off the head and the body dies. Synchronized volleys where 3 marksmen fired at once to ensure kills. because even with stabilization, nothing's perfect, and rapid repositioning using the brigantine's superior speed to stay at optimal range. The steady eyes worked in teams of 3, one winding the mechanism, listening for that telltale hum that meant the gyroscope was up to speed. One spotting with a telescope, calling out targets and range. One shooting, squeezing the trigger with the calm precision of a surgeon. Then rotating. The shooter becomes the spotter becomes the winder becomes the shooter. Continuous fire. Continuous death raining down from impossible distances. As the Spanish formations broke down, and they did break down, because when officers are dead and crew are panicking, formations don't hold Thornley closed for what everyone expected would be the traditional killing blow. Grappling hooks, boarding, cutlass work, blood, on the deck. But that's not what happened. Instead, his marksman methodically disabled the galleon's steering, shot the helmsman, shot anyone who approached the wheels, shot the ropes controlling the rudders. Then they shot down anyone who approached the guns, just methodically, calmly, like they were conducting target practice. And they forced surrender without losing a single man to combat. Not one. Think about that. 3 treasure galleons taken without a single pirate casualty. News of the victory spread through the Caribbean like wildfire. And when I say wildfire, I mean it hit every port, every tavern, every pirate haven from Jamaica to Madagascar within weeks. The Caribbean in 1721 was actually a remarkably connected world for people in the sweet trade. Ships moved. News moved with them. Within a month, pirate captains were showing up in Nassau seeking audience with Thornley. Blackbeard himself, Edward Teach, the most feared pirate of the age, arrived with 4 ships, offering partnership and promising to make Thornley admiral of a pirate fleet. Admiral. This, from a man who didn't take orders from anyone. The French pirate Olivier Levasseur, fresh from Indian Ocean raids, brought diamonds from a captured prize as a gift, as an offering, hoping for access to the technology. Even Henry Jennings, the gentleman pirate who'd founded the Nassau Republic, the closest thing pirates had to legitimate government, acknowledged that Thornley had changed the game forever. The Brotherhood of the Coast faced a decision that would define their future. Embrace this new technology that violated centuries of naval tradition because tradition mattered, even to pirates, or watch Thornley's followers dominate the hunting grounds. Watch this new breed of mechanically enhanced pirates take all the best prizes. Watch the old ways become obsolete. But here's the thing about innovations that change warfare. They don't stay secret. They can't. Success breeds attention. Attention breeds theft. And theft breeds something far worse than competition. It breeds your enemies, learning your secrets and doing them better. By 1724, just 3 years after Devil's Teeth Reef, 43 pirate vessels carried gyroscopic mounts. 43. Each one handcrafted in workshops from Tortuga to Madagascar. Each one representing months of skilled labor and a small fortune in materials. The innovation that promised pirate supremacy was spreading exactly as Thornley had hoped. Except it wasn't just spreading among pirates. The British Admiralty, after capturing the pirate sloop Ranger with intact gyroscopic mechanisms, reverse-engineered the design within 6 months. 6 months. They had resources Thornley never dreamed of, machine shops in Portsmouth, the finest metallurgists in Europe, unlimited funding from the Crown. Their version, manufactured in those Portsmouth yards with superior metallurgy and precision tools, surpassed Thornley's original in every measurable way. It was lighter. It was more reliable. The springs lasted longer. The brass was purer. Spanish engineers in Cadiz, working from plans purchased from a betraying pirate quartermaster for 10,000 pieces of 8. And someone always betrays for the right price, developed a 3-axis stabilization system that kept cannons steady, not just muskets, cannons. Think about the implications. Thornley had made muskets accurate at sea. The Spanish made artillery accurate at sea. They'd taken his innovation and scaled it up. The technology that was supposed to level the playing field instead tilted it even further against the pirates. Because here's the brutal economics of warfare. The side with more resources always wins the arms race. Always. Pirates could build dozens of gyroscopic mounts. Naval powers could build thousands. But the technological defeat wasn't even the worst part. The social cost within pirate communities proved equally devastating, maybe more so. Traditional marksmen who'd spent decades perfecting their craftmen, like Portuguese Pedro, who could shoot a playing card at 60 paces on land, found themselves replaced by any man who could wind a spring. Any man. It didn't matter if you had talent or years of experience. If you could turn a key and wait 3 seconds, you could be a steady eye. The skill was in the mechanism, not the man. The democratic nature of pirate crews, and this was fundamental to how piracy worked, was that captains were elected and could be deposed by vote. Ships were run like little floating republics. Everyone got a share. Everyone got a voice. But this started to crumble as those controlling gyroscopic technology accumulated unprecedented power. If you knew how to maintain the mechanisms, how to repair them, how to manufacture new springs, suddenly you were indispensable. You couldn't be voted off. You couldn't be replaced. You had leverage. Ships split between mechanicals who maintained the devices and naturals who rejected them. Fights broke out. Ships divided. Crews mutinied. The pirate articles, those sacred agreements governing crew behavior, the closest thing pirates had to a constitution, couldn't adapt quickly enough to address fundamental questions. Who deserved extra shares for mechanical knowledge versus traditional seamanship? Who owned the technology if the crew voted out a captain? Could a mechanical refuse to serve under a new captain? These seem like small administrative questions until you realize they're tearing apart the social fabric that made pirate crews function. Thornley himself grew bitter, watching his dream perverted. Letters to his sister in Porto, discovered in Portuguese archives in the 1980s, reveal a man haunted by unintended consequences. Listen to his words. I sought to free us from tyranny's reach, yet created new chains. The Spanish now mount my devices on slave ships, making escape impossible. The British use them to hunt my brothers with deadly efficiency. I have armed our enemies with our own innovation. His workshop on Dead Man's Cay was abandoned by 1725. The forges went cold. The tools were scattered or stolen. Resources became too scarce. The advantage was lost. Liu Wei returned to China. Francisco de Torres was ransomed back to his family. Mama Aduni took her skills to a maroon community in Jamaica. The dream was over. The end came on November 18th, 1726, off the Windward Passage. Thornley, commanding his last 3 ships with 47 gyroscopic mounts, the best equipment piracy could produce, engaged a British squadron of 6 warships, equipped with the Admiralty's improved stabilization systems. For 9 hours they fought. 9 hours. The most accurate naval battle in the entire age of sail. Musket balls finding marks at 200 yards. Cannon shots placed with surgical precision. No more random. Broadside hoping something hits. This was targeted, deliberate, deadly accurate fire from both sides. And it was a slaughter. Thornley's flagship, Serpent's Dream, took 17 hits below the waterline. 17. Each one precisely aimed to hold the ship, to sink it, to kill it. His innovative weapons couldn't overcome superior numbers and superior firepower. The math was brutal. 3 pirate ships against 6 British warships, all using similar technology, meant the British had twice the guns, delivering twice the accurate fire. As the ship sank, and witnesses reported this, sailors on both sides who survived Thornley stood at his personal gyroscopic mount, methodically firing at British officers until the Caribbean claimed him. He went down shooting, not in some desperate last stand, but calmly, professionally, using the weapon he'd invented to kill as many of his enemies as possible before the sea took him. There's something both heroic and profoundly sad about that image. Tom Weatherby survived by clinging to wreckage for 18 hours before being picked up by a merchant vessel. He was later pardoned under the Act of Grace, one of those periodic amnesties the British offered to pirates who'd surrender. He spent his final years in Port Royal, writing the only complete account of Thornley's innovation, But here's the thing, nobody believed him. For 3 centuries, his manuscript sat hidden in a Jamaican church, dismissed as pirate mythology, tall tales from an old man trying to make his youth sound more exciting than it was, until 2019. Marine archaeologists found the wreck of the Serpent's Dream in 140 feet of water off Haiti, and they found corroded gyroscopic mechanisms. The brass wheels, though coral-encrusted and eaten by centuries of salt water, still showed the precision machining that briefly made Muskets dance with waves yet strike true. The archaeological evidence proved Tom Weatherby had been telling the truth all along. Today, historians debate whether Thornley's innovation truly changed history or represents a footnote, a dead-end technology that arrived too early and disappeared too quickly to matter. The academic arguments go back and forth, but Caribbean fishermen still sing songs about Mad Jack's ghost. They say he stands on a spectral deck, his musket steady as stone while his ship rolls through eternity's storms, still firing at enemies who can never be defeated, still trying to level a playing field that was never really level to begin with. Maybe that's the real legacy. Not the technology, but the dream of desperate men trying to use innovation to escape tyranny, only to discover that innovation itself can become another form of chains.